Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to your next mini lesson for English 12 here at Jenison International Academy. Today's lesson is going to focus on the medieval period and how rulers and kings began to take hold in British society. So buckle up, we're in for a journey of a lot of names coming your way. Make sure to take those Cornell notes to the best of your ability. Make sure to follow all those steps so that you're working with the material in multiple ways in order to cement the details into your study routine. After his visiting and victory at Hastings, William the Conqueror lost no time taking full control of England. He was a new kind of king. He was powerful, well organized, and he was determined to exert his authority down to the smallest detail. Many people resented innovations such as the Domesday Book, which was an extraordinary tax record of every bit of property owned, from fish ponds to litters of pigs to details within your estate. But no one could deny that William brought law and order to the land. A scribe said, so that any honest man could travel over his kingdom without injury, with his bosom full of gold. So William the Conqueror's goal in creating these things was to protect the people, in addition to the land and what was owned in their possessions. It was to make this epic society, this period before where we started out at the beginning of time with the Norman conquest and the origin of the nation, where it was pillaging and warfare and a battle for control, and to add some structure to it as well. Is there still going to be battles for control? You bet. We'll get to that in just a minute. But at the same time, it was the ability for there to be some control and some rule. Now, power struggles in the decade after William's death left England in a state of near anarchy until 1154, when his son, Henry Plantagenet, took the throne as Henry II. He was one of medieval England's most memorable rulers, and he reformed the judicial system by setting up royal courts throughout the country, establishing a system of juries, and beginning to form English common law out of a patchwork of century-old practices. After him, Henry's young son Richard I, known as Richard the Lion-Hearted, spent most of his 10-year reign fighting wars abroad. During his absence, his younger brother, John, plotted against him, and he's the villain of Robin Hood legends as King John. He was treacherous, he was bad-tempered, he would quarrel with nobles, and he would raise their taxes until they threatened to rebel. But in 1215, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which limited royal authority by granting more power to the barons, which was an early step into the road to democracy and what we experienced later on, and the steps that the constitutional monarchy becomes today as well. So on his return, Richard I is there as well. Now, as the medieval period drew to a close, there was a near constant fact of life. We experienced the 100 Years' War between England and France, and it began in 1337 during the reign of Edward III. As the war continued on and off for more than a century, England also had to weather several domestic crises, including a terrible plague known as the Black Death, which killed a third of England's population as well. When that war finally ended in 1453, England had lost nearly all of its French possessions. Two rival families claimed the throne: the House of York, whose symbol was a white rose, and the House of Lancaster, whose symbol was a red rose. The fighting that ensued, known as the Wars of the Roses, ended in 1485, when the Lancastrian Henry Tudor killed the Yorkist king Richard III at Bosworth Field and took the throne as Henry VII. Now I want you to watch here as these two crests, symbols of these houses, combine. House of Tudor begins, and the Tudor dynasty begins, and you can see that the Wars of the Roses really combined and stuck as a part of this history, as the white rose and the red rose became one, intentionally on the part of Henry Tudor. This event marks the end of the Middle Ages in England. So what are the cultural influences going on here? There's three social forces at play. First off is the feudal system. Feudalism was a political and economic system that William the Conqueror introduced into England after the Norman conquest. Based on the premise that the king owns the land in the kingdom, William kept a fourth of the land for himself, granted a fourth to the church, and parceled out the rest to the loyal barons, who in return either paid him or supplied him with warriors called knights. The barons swore allegiance to the king, the knights to the barons, and so on down the social ladder, and at the bottom were the conquered Anglo-Saxons, many of whom were serfs and peasant bound to land that they could not own. So you can see the structure, from one to many, but one having all the power there as well. Additionally, the power of the church was an important piece in the cultural influence. There was one grand exception to the feudal system's hierarchy, and a piece that stood on its own all by itself, and that was the church. The church was led by the Pope in Rome. The medieval church wielded tremendous power, from levying taxes, making it its own laws, running its own courts, and keeping kings and noblemen in line with the threat of excommunication. The church owned more land than anyone in Europe, and its soaring stone cathedrals and grand abbeys were as impressive as any castle, as seen in the picture here too. In its heyday, this site was immaculate. It was beautiful. The church's power did lead to conflicts with the monarchy. When Henry II's archbishop and friend, Thomas A. Becket, began favoring church interests over those of the crown, 4 knights loyal to the king murdered him. Becket was declared a saint, and his shrine at Canterbury became a popular destination for pilgrims, such as those described in Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. We're going to see that later on with Henry VIII too, breaking from the Catholic Church and becoming the Church of England. The final force here is chivalry and courtly love. Medieval literature, including famous stories of King Arthur, was influenced by another social force as well, the ideals of chivalry and courtly love made popular during Henry II's reign. Henry's wife, Eleanor of Aquitaine, brought from French court circles the concept of chivalry, this code of honor that is intended to govern knightly behavior. The code encouraged knights to be generous, brave, pious, and honorable, and to defend the weak and to battle evil and uphold good. It also encouraged knights to go on holy quests such as the Crusades, the military expeditions in which European Christians attempted to wrest the holy city of Jerusalem from Muslim control. Eleanor and her daughter Marie applied chivalric ideas to the relationships between men and women as well, and they presided over a court of love, where lords and ladies would come to be entertained by music and tales of King Arthur and other romantic heroes, and argue about the proper conduct of a love affair. Courtly love and the concept of chivalry represented ideals rarely met in real life, yet they served as inspiration for some of the finest literature of the time. Some pieces that we bring in here. So in the literature of the times. The most famous writer of medieval times, the father of English literature, was Geoffrey Chaucer. He was a poet who demonstrated the potential of English as a literary language. Drawing on sources as diverse as French poetry, English songs, Greek classics, and contemporary Italian tales, and Aesop's fables, Chaucer masterfully blended old and new, all in the natural rhythms of Middle English, the spoken language at the time. An English masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales, is Chaucer's best-known work, and it displays his ability as a storyteller, his keen sense of humor, and his sharp eye for detail. It's a collection of tales ranging from irreverent to inspirational, and is held together by a frame story about a group of pilgrims who pass time on their journey to the shrine of Thomas Becket by telling stories. The pilgrims' characters are revealed through their stories they tell and their reactions to one another's tales. Though Chaucer apparently intended to have each of the 30 pilgrims tell 4 stories apiece, he died having completed only 24 of those tales. Chaucer lived during a time of change and turmoil in England, and he was born just a few years after the outbreak of the 100 Years' War and was still a small child when the bubonic plague hit Europe. The Black Death, as it was known, greatly reduced the population, which led to a shortage of laborers, and in turn serfs realized their new value and left the land to work in towns and on neighboring estates. This shift led to the decline of feudalism and the growth of a new middle class, to which Chaucer's family belonged. In addition, the war with France had spurred the reemergence of the English language among the ruling class, and with its cast of characters ranging across British society, from the perfect gentle knight to the common miller, and its use of everyday English rather than the elevated Latin or French, the Canterbury Tales reflected all of these developments. Chaucer was not the only poet of his time to compose in English or write about ordinary people. William Langland did both in his masterpiece Piers Plowman, as did writers of the popular ballads of the day, those ballads being narrative songs telling of the lives of common folks, or of the characters and events from folklore. The combination of Chaucer's literary gifts from social status, however, led to a new appreciation of English as a language that, while useful in everyday life, was elegant and poetic as well. See, the Canterbury Tales and Chaucer's other works were widely popular in his own time, and they inspired a generation of English poets. One admirer sent him a ballad addressed to noble Geoffrey Chaucer that described him as such ancient thinkers Socrates, Seneca, and Ovid, all rolled into one. Another poet, John Lydgate, wrote after Chaucer's death, we may try to counterfeit his style, but it will not be the well is dry. And 3/4 of a century later, the Canterbury Tales was still so widely enjoyed that it was among the earliest books chosen to be published by William Caxton, the first English printer. Additionally, medieval romances, stories of adventure and gallant love, chivalry and heroism, represented for many readers the social order and ideals of the Middle Ages. Yet tales such as those of the good King Arthur and his sword Excalibur, Merlin the Magician, Queen Guinevere and Sir Lancelot, and the Knights of the Round Table were set in an idealized world quite unlike the real medieval England, with its plagues, political battles, and civil unrest. In fact, while it was true that chivalry and courtly love were ideals made popular during the Middle Period, the real author was not of this age. From what little is known of him, Arthur was a Briton, a Romanized descendant of the long-haired, blue-eyed warriors who fought Caesar's army. A Latin history written around AD 1800, 200 years or more after Arthur's death, first mentions Artorius as a leader in the 6th century battles against Anglo-Saxon invaders. For centuries, oral poets in Wales celebrated their legendary hero Arthur just as Anglo-Saxon Scots celebrated Beowulf. Then, about 1135, the monk Geoffrey of Monmouth produced a Latin history based on Old Welsh legends. Geoffrey's book caught the fancy of French, German, and English writers, who soon created their own versions of the legends, updating them to reflect the then current notions of chivalry. While the traditional tales focused on Arthur himself, on his courage and success in battle, these new romances used Arthur and his court as a backdrop for stories about knights who go through trials and perform great feats, often influenced by the idea of courtly love in the service of a lady. About 1375, an anonymous English poet wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, recounting the marvelous adventures of a knight of Arthur's court who faces a series of extraordinary challenges. Exciting, suspenseful, and peopled by an array of memorable characters, from the mysterious green giant who survives beheading to the all-too-human Sir Gawain. The 2,500-line poem is easy to imagine as a favorite of troubadours and their audiences. A century later, in Les Morts d'Arthur, Sir Thomas Malory retold a number of the French Arthurian tales in Middle English. Despite its title, which means the death of Arthur, Malory's book included many episodes in the life of the legendary king. It's considered a precursor to the modern novel. Oddly enough, it was printed just weeks before the final battle in the Wars of the Roses, the last English battle ever fought by knights in armor. Fittingly, then, the literary fall of Camelot coincides with the real-life end of chivalry and the end of the Middle Ages as well. Make sure you have your Cornell notes down, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure that you submit those. And if you have questions, be sure to reach out to your instructors. We're going to have a significant shift in the subject matter that we study here, and it's important to signify that difference. Have a good week, and we'll see you back here next time.